Please welcome to the stage CAPC Palliative Care Leader, Donna Stevens.
Thank you very much. It's pretty awesome to be introduced by the voice of God, which is actually C.V. Wismer, who has done just a great job, if we could just give him a round of applause, in manning all of this. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Beth Lone, and you're in for a real treat for the next session. People want to be cared for by people who are cared for, or at least I do. Dr. Beth Lone is the Chief Medical Officer of the Schwartz Center for Compassionate Healthcare. She leads the thought leadership and content development, but she's also the Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard. She's a busy woman. One foundational element of Schwartz is Schwartz rounds. You may be familiar with Schwartz rounds. In my previous life, I was a palliative care leader, leading a team, and what Schwartz rounds does is where healthcare staff are able to process emotions associated with healthcare delivery. I've witnessed firsthand the value of Schwartz rounds, being the only real medicine for workforce strife during COVID. The power of giving voice, being able to tell their story, and be seen in a real way by others in the trenches. It really was life-changing for many, or allowed them to go on to the next patient feeling a little bit more cared for. The Schwartz Center and Dr. Lone understand the need for systems approaches to well-being of the workforce versus a lavender cart rolling through the hallways offering cookies. Thank you for your work, Beth. And welcome.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm so small, I just have to. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to speak with all of you about the health of the healthcare team, which we know is just so vitally essential to providing compassionate, safe, equitable, and effective care. So today, I hope to talk a little bit about the state of health and well-being amongst healthcare workers. We'll talk about the importance of systems-level approaches to address all the challenges that we're seeing. And I will talk a little bit about some models that we've developed for systemically supporting the well-being of health professionals. First, though, I want to start with a story, and it really struck me because this so resonated with Shirley Roberson's story, but I want to tell the story about this gentle man who experienced symptoms that he just couldn't shake, back and forth to his primary care team, felt like no one was listening to him, changed the place where he was seeking care, and 3 months after the onset of his symptoms, he was diagnosed with advanced non-small cell lung cancer. That patient was Ken Schwartz. The year was 1994. And Ken wrote about his experiences in a very moving article. It's on our website. I read it every year because it still resonates with me. But he talks about his harrowing experiences that were punctuated, though, by these exquisite moments of compassion that, in his words, made the unbearable bearable. 2 days before Ken died, he called his friends and family together to his bedside and asked them to start a center so that compassion would never be extinguished in healthcare, which he was really worried about. He was a health policy advisor, a healthcare attorney, and this was the height of the managed care era, which as a PCP I lived through and got to know as the cost strangulation care model, whatever. I mean, it was just really, it's the first time I really felt I couldn't be an advocate for my patients. And so he was concerned about how systemic changes were really impacting the relationships between those who want to care and the patients and their families who are seeking care. And so his friends and family established the Schwartz Center, and we are now a membership organization. Our members are organizations in large healthcare systems. We have well over 600 members, in the US, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, and we work with partners in the United Kingdom, and they implement or train people to implement Schwartz rounds in the UK and in Ireland. And we do this with the vision and the mission, which is still Ken's, which is to keep compassion at the heart of healthcare. And we do it through our programs, our education and advocacy. So I want to just see if I can get some of you to shout out, what is the core factor that in your minds, in your lives, gives life and vitality to your team or your organization? You can raise your hands, but you don't have to. I probably can't see you anyway. Shout it out, and I really want you to speak. Don't be afraid. What gives you life and vitality? Love. Love. Oh, I thought I would never hear that word. We don't talk about love in healthcare, do we? But that's really at the heart of it all, isn't it? What else? Anything else? Humor. Passion. Compassion. What else? Dignity. One more? Each other. Thank you. Thank you. That's from Brad? Yes, being able to work together to provide the kind of care that we all have felt called to do, to provide loving care with dignity and respect that is equitable, safe, and compassionate. That's at the heart of healthcare. So how well do you think that we are, or our organizations are doing in terms of nurturing our vitality today? I have to say in 2 words, probably not well. These are, I don't know if you can read this, but we see a lot of data from Tate Shanafeld. I want to highlight Linda Aiken, who is a nurse researcher who's done some incredible work. And this is a very large study of over 5,000 nurses and over 15,000 physicians. There were others included. But you can see very high burnout rates that persist. Not as high, perhaps, if you're looking at the mean as what we were seeing in the pandemic. But if you look at the upper ends of the range of burnout, it's pretty high. And then also, I wanted to highlight intentions to leave within the next year, if possible. Again, very high, 23, 43%, and the higher even in the ranges. And of course, everybody is really still experiencing a lot of profound psychological distress. Interestingly, in her study, intention to leave and was correlated both for physicians and nurses with nurse burnout, which I thought was really interesting. And in this study, many physicians and nurses rated their hospitals unfavorably on patient safety. Of course, they reported having too few nurses. This is not new news. A poor work environment. They lack confidence in management, and fewer than 10% of clinicians describe their workplace as joyful. But I have to say that this study done by the Physicians Foundation and released in this year, actually, not too long ago, really scared me. They surveyed physicians, medical students, and residents, trainees. And I think what was shocking here was that if you combine the proportions of med students and residents reporting these symptoms, well, 53% reported increased use of medications, alcohol, or illicit drugs, and 27% reported having thoughts about or actions of self-harm. This is really frightening. It is very, very scary, and it should be a call to action for all of us. I think I want to say that what I think we're all collectively experiencing goes beyond the notion of burnout. I do believe it's about moral injury, where we witness behaviors or we have to act in ways that violate our most deeply held values. This is just profoundly injurious to us. And it's really because we're operating within these larger societal, organizational, and systemic constraints that make us unable to do what we feel we've been called to do, and that is resulting in a lot of people leaving the field, including a lot of my coworkers and colleagues and friends. And this is just heartbreaking. And yet it is the reality of today. Again, from this Linda Aiken study, when you look at what people really want to see, they want to see operational changes, changes in the way we practice so that we can actually keep patients and families at the center of our care. What was ranked the lowest in this study was things like resiliency training. And I think people are laughing. Don't tell me I have to be more resilient, you know? I think everybody understands what I mean. It's, you know, we are resilient. What we need is to be able to reduce the barriers to expressing our compassion. I was surprised to see that even establishing clinician wellness committees and appointing a champion for this ranked lower than these other examples. So it's clear what people want, and the need for healing is critical. We have to heal our healthcare systems so we can heal our patients. We have to address the psychological distress that is so prevalent. We have to address all of the causes of shortages, which is really also partly the cause of, you know, moral injury, is because we're not paying attention to these person-centered values and priorities, because that's what healthcare needs to survive. We're seeing some impact on quality and safety, certainly on patient experience, and also the stability of healthcare organizations in terms of their financial stability. So there are plenty of arguments to be made. I want to talk about some of the organizational tools that the Schwartz Center offers, and I'm going to talk briefly about Schwartz rounds and stress first aid, but I want to circle in on the Healing Healthcare Initiative, which is our newest initiative and a work in progress. How many of you have participated in Schwartz rounds or experienced it? Yeah, oh, that's terrific. So Schwartz rounds are meetings where anyone who touches the care of a patient or family in healthcare can get together and talk about some of the most challenging, emotionally, psychologically, socially challenging issues that we face in the everyday care of patients and their families. They are offered to everyone. We don't care if you are, you know, what your roles or responsibilities are. We want everybody to participate in this. And it provides safe or courageous space for people to share what they're feeling and to process some of the trauma that they have experienced. We've studied this a lot. Other people have studied. I recently went on to PubMed. I was surprised to see how many researchers have looked at the impacts of Schwartz rounds. But what we see is increased insight into some of these dimensions of illness and of care, the impacts on us, increased appreciation of the roles, responsibilities, the perspectives of teammates. I know I've had been in a Schwartz rounds when I thought, oh my God, is that what your experience is really like? I had no idea. So there are these aha moments that can occur. We see increased sense of support and decreased sense of isolation. Our partners in the UK, Point of Care Foundation, did a very well-funded study by the equivalent of their NIH. And what they showed is that looking at a scale called the GHQ-12, General Health Questionnaire 12 item, when they compared people who came to people who didn't come, the odds of reaching a level of psychological distress, becoming a case of psychological distress, the odds of reporting that level of psychological distress was significantly lower amongst those who participated compared with those who don't, 20% lower. So we think that this is building an evidence base for Schwartz rounds, but we wanted to do more. And in the midst of the pandemic, actually in March, we started preparing to launch Stress First Aid. This is a evidence-informed self-care and peer support program. We worked with the National Center for PTSD consultants to think about, well, how do these principles of trauma-informed care, how can we use some of this to be effective in supporting the healthcare workforce? And so we offer two versions of this, a basics version and a train the trainer version, again, when we train the teams in local organizations or across the system to implement this program throughout the system. And we provide monthly community learning sessions and support for both Schwartz rounds and for Stress First Aid. I have to say the stress continuum has really started to take off, so people are using it at the beginning of rounds or team huddles to figure out where's your team at. Are you in the green zone, yellow, orange, red? Let's pay attention to people, especially in the orange zone, before they tip over into being in the red zone. But also around the pandemic time, at its onset, we realized we really have to be doing even more than the offerings that we already had and started thinking about how can we really create organizational cultures that provide the foundation, the essential, critical, basic key principles that will support compassionate healthcare culture. And so we organized and developed this initiative that is designed to help leaders think about their operations, their processes, their practices, their measures, so that they can help health workers really prioritize their well-being so we can do what we've been called to do and provide care that is safe, compassionate, equitable, and effective. So this is the Healing Healthcare Initiative. It's a senior leadership program that we launched for people C-suite level and others in senior leadership positions to participate. We put out a application process within our membership and selected 6 pilot sites to work with us to develop this program. Our goals are to provide a framework, resources, and implementation guidance, and we require leaders to organize something we're calling an HHI organizational committee to co-design solutions to the challenges and priorities they're identifying. And I think, like all of our programs, the key for us is to provide space, courageous space, safe space, to step back and reflect on how people are really thinking, feeling, to share their emotions. Again, to do this for leadership has proven to be valuable for our early adopter pilot sites, and it's not easy, but I think it is absolutely essential. Let's see if I can advance this. There we go. This is our HHI framework. So again, we looked at the framework for trauma-informed care of patients and populations that SAMHSA had put out, and we convened a national advisory group to help us adapt it to the healthcare workforce. And so we decided on 6 key principles that we wanted to hold leaders accountable for, that we wanted them to embed into organizational culture. And they include psychological and physical safety, so that leaders will create a safe and trusted environment that at least tries to insulate people from harm. Inclusion, voice, and choice, meaning that workers are actually going to be involved in designing and creating and implementing the solutions that they think will work together with leadership. Diversity and equity, addressing all forms of structural discrimination and racism. Team cohesiveness and collaboration, fostering mutual respect, shared purpose, collaborative learning. Building trust, this is incredibly frayed right now, but building trust by being trustworthy. And building trust among patients, health workers and leaders, and mental health and well-being, which of course all of these key principles contribute to mental health and well-being of the health workforce, but we wanted to save it as a separate key principle because we also wanted to address mental health and behavioral health stigma, and we wanted to make it easier and normal for people to be able to report and access care, especially in view of the data we're seeing. This visual image has helped our teams really think about the spectrum from being trauma-inducing, being a trauma-inducing organization, and moving from inducing trauma to reducing trauma. And these concepts are very, very helpful because you can step in at any point on this sliding spectrum and think about, where is our team at? Where's our organization at? How are we going to move to the right side of this spectrum? When you are a trauma-organized organization, you actually organize around the trauma because you're constantly reactive, and people are always retelling, reliving the trauma, re-traumatizing themselves in the process, and you can't move beyond that sort of state of being paralyzed. Or you're doing avoiding and numbing and not talking about it at all. There's frequently inequity and sometimes authoritarian leadership that doesn't include anybody's voice in making decisions. You can become more trauma-informed by beginning to educate yourself, educate ourselves, educate everybody about the nature and the impact of trauma, developing a shared language so people can begin to understand and share their experiences and figure out, well, where are we on this scale, even on this stress continuum? and recognizing cultural trauma, sociocultural trauma, and structural repression, and how that operates within our healthcare organizations and systems. And in that way, we can start to move towards the right end of the spectrum, where we become a reflective learning organization that makes meaning out of the past, that is more collaborative, that is focused on not just reducing but preventing trauma, that is collaborative, oriented towards equity, and is resting the basis of this on relational leadership. These are some of our program components. We build community, or try to, in everything we do. So we have peer learning sessions across the cohort for all 6 of our pilot sites. We are running Schwartz rounds for them, and the one we're planning right now is a real experiment where we're bringing together members of the pilot sites organizational committees with leaders to have a combined Schwartz rounds with members of both of those types of teams on the panel and on the audience for discussion. And we, of course, have had expert lesson sessions on each of the key principles. We have lots of online learning and implementation guidance. We have been working closely with a relational leadership coach, Dr. Ken Epstein, who's an incredible teacher and facilitator. And then we have action steps and action building with a roadmap that I'll show you in a minute. This is our roadmap. You're not going to read this. I just am showing it to tell you something about it. What we've provided is suggested sessions that people can jump in and out of depending on what they've already accomplished. So for all of this, we have implementation guidance, facilitator guides, PowerPoint slides, and the like. But the point of showing you this is that we've braided together the work of the organizational committees, the HHI organizational committees, which are supposed to represent a swath of the healthcare workforce. And in particular, people want to do this in a more targeted fashion. Workers who are going to be most affected by whatever decisions are made during the course of this initiative. So we have the HHIOCs, we call them, the organizational committees doing some separate work, the leadership teams doing some separate work, and then coming together to integrate and to braid together what they're doing, what their perspectives are, and with how they want to move forward. And so this is sort of the format of the implementation roadmap. We are trying to measure success, but we know that organizational change and culture change is really, really hard. And it takes a long time. So I have to say, you know, we're not as far along in the roadmap as where we thought we might be. But that's okay, because teams are meeting weekly to discuss how they're thinking about this and organizing their organizational committees, which are doing the hard work as well. So we'll see, you know, what a more reasonable timeline will be ultimately. But at the beginning of all this work, we asked the organizations and the teams to first do, before they started, to do an organizational practices survey. What are the practices, the processes, the programs, the measures by which they are working through each of the key principles? And this was a real aha moment for the teams, because there's a lot of work that's going on in these organizations, and it's good work, but it's in silos, it's in pockets. It might be with EAP or HR, and people are not always so willing to turn to them because, you know, sometimes that goes on your work record and people don't want to have that there. And so people aren't leveraging their collective strengths to really work through towards goals and priorities that they've set. So this was a real organizing moment for the teams at the very beginning of the initiative. We've done a health leader survey to see to what extent to the leadership teams, are they all on the same page in terms of how their organizational values dictate strategic decision making in terms of the key principles? Do they have the tools and the resources? And above all, do they know what the healthcare workers need and want? And the lowest ranked ratings were right there. That's what we saw, was that the leaders were not on the same page, and they rated themselves lowest in understanding what healthcare workers really need to experience each of the key principles. So that was a lot of food for reflection and discussion amongst the leaders as well. So I was asked to make some recommendations, but what I'm really going to just sort of share with you are things that we're learning along the way. I think the most important thing that we keep coming back to at the Schwartz Center is that people have to have space for reflection, for relational repair, for trust building, for sharing and processing what they have been through. And I think at this point, we're supposedly post-pandemic, but the workforce is is very, very diverse. There are people coming into the workforce now who didn't experience the pandemic. There are people who are significantly traumatized from the pandemic, from social injustice, the murder of George Floyd. We have a hospital in Minnesota that really has not gotten past that. So people are at very diverse points in the trauma spectrum that I showed you, and that needs to be taken into account. We need to provide relational healing space and places for relational repair. It's important, and this is what the teams and the leadership teams have been working on. How do the key principles align with already existing strategic goals, mandates, and priorities? And so teams are working hard on integrating that right now. We've also learned that trust right now is just so frayed that the workforce really believes that leaders really don't care about them. And that is going to take a lot of repair and space and conversation. And it depends in part on visible leadership presence, but also on continuous listening strategies. So we're not talking about a town hall here and there. What is your organizational listening strategy? How are you going to implement it? How are we going to use the feedback? How are you going to include the workforce voices to really start to work together, to braid together the preferences and the priorities of everybody involved in the care of patients and their families? And then, of course, inclusion, voice, and choice. We want the organizations to walk the walk of the key principles, not just talk about them. We are talking about measures, and so are the teams, and we are trying to think about what would a compassion dashboard look like. We've asked the teams to design their own compassion dashboards based on the key principles. And so I'd love to do some extra work on that. If anybody's interested in working on this, let me know. In the meantime, people are using validated measures, the burnout inventories. They're looking a lot at engagement, even though that really doesn't completely reflect all the key principles. So we're learning a lot, and we're sort of early on this path. It's a really different way of thinking about change for us, and what we're really hoping to do is create foundational cultures that really make it possible to do what we've been called to do, as I've said, to provide care that is compassionate, equitable, safe, and effective. So I am going to stop there. I think we have a little time for questions. I don't know if we have microphones, Katie? Any way to run some mics? Or I'll repeat the question. You just raised your hand. Do you want to?
I just wondered, first of all, just thank you for this work. It's so important.
Thank you.
I just wondered if you are opening applications for 2024, if you're planning, or if you're going to keep it cohort that you have now to learn more about it.
Yeah, so the question is, what are we doing in 2024? Are we opening applications? So this cohort's going to end April 2024. And then we've hired an external implementation science evaluation team to help us really work through what was working and what isn't. We're learning a lot and changing it as we go. So we're going to complete this cohort and probably open applications towards the end of 2024 for our members. So stay tuned for that. Any other? Is there any other questions? No? I like answering questions. Okay, thank you very much.